Hi, Romal. Thank you for being on my
Hi, Kuki.
podcast. It's
My
been like
pleasure.
I've been trying to get you on the podcast for a while, but you've been busy, and I'm glad that we finally made it. Both of us have been able to make it here. But
Absolutely.
yeah, to start off, right, I just want to ask, like, just get to the point. What do you think about, how do you see what's happening in Manipur, and what do you think about the violence, the ethnic violence in Manipur? How do you like to kind of define it?
Um, that's a very complicated question, but I think as a Meitei person myself, I'm half Meitei and I'm half South Indian. And I grew up in primarily a Meitei community that for me always looked like a tinderbox that was just waiting for, a spark to explode. Like when I heard about the violence breaking out on 3rd of May, one part of me was not surprised. One part of me was very surprised. And I'll explain what I mean. Now, being an ethnic Meitei person, I've always felt that the culture kind of lends itself to a certain sense of racism by the way Meiteis define themselves, by the way they define themselves in relation to the communities around them, and things like that from a language that is almost inherently racist in the terms that are used to define people who are not of Meitei origin. Terms like Mayang, terms like how, which are used very unconsciously, and people use them without really thinking about what these terms really mean. And to give you an example, Mayang basically would translate into different face or strange face, and it's the term that is used to define someone who is not of Meitei origin.
Yeah,
And
I am Maya.
how is a term that is
Yeah,
used to define tribals today.
yeah,
And it's a terrible term. It's not nice in any way. And there is obviously a much nicer way of saying it, because if you go back in time, I think people just referred to people who lived in the hills as Chingmi, which is a much more geographical kind of a term and is not offensive in any way. But how is a term that has been used now for generations? I think even my grandfather's generation used the term, and it's never been used in a light sense. Now, if you go back in time, we're always told as Meiteis that we come from the history of the relationship between the people who live in the hills and the people who live in the valley, the Chingmi and the Tammi as we call them. We're often told when we're growing up that Meiteis we are people who've come from the two brothers who apparently, and this is one of the many origin myths of the state of at least the people who live in Manipur. So one of the origin myths says two brothers came from somewhere else, and then they looked down at this beautiful fertile valley, and then the elder brother said, it's going to be tougher for us to tame the hills, and so he sends the younger brother down into the valley and says, you go forth and multiply there, and you have the fertile valley with the lake in its center, and life will be easier for you. But because I'm older than you, I know how to tame the hills, and so therefore everyone who's in the hills basically came from the line of the older brother, and people in the valley are people from the younger brother. And we're often told about beautiful practices that existed once upon a time. Like apparently, at one point of time in typical Meitei society, you always left a lantern burning outside your front door in the night, basically saying if the older brother ever returns, he needs to have a light to show that he's welcome into this house and things like that. So on one side you're told that there is this beautiful friendship between the two communities, that the people of the valley look at the people of the hills as their elder brethren, or people to look up to, people who have far more knowledge, far more wisdom, all of those kind of things. But the reality has often been very different, and I think this largely happened because of Vaishnavism coming into Manipur somewhere in the 17th century. And with Vaishnavism, a sense of the Varna system also came into the valley. And while a lot of Bengali Brahmins moved because of Shantidas Gosai into the valley, you had a lot of the other noble houses which were related to the king, who also converted to Vaishnavism, then becoming therefore the Kshatriyas. So there was the Brahmins who were brought in from Bengal, then you have the Kshatriyas. And I don't think in Manipur we think of anyone as Vaishyas. but we definitely needed to have Shudras to define, the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins. And in what seems like a very lazy way of dividing society, they just decided that anyone who was not Meitei at that point of time, anyone who had not adopted Vaishnavism, therefore was the Shudra. And this included some Meitei communities too. Like, for example, even today we talk about the Loi community, which are communities that are based in pockets in and around the valley. Generally, people who've held on to Sanamahism, which is the religion before Vaishnavism. And the now upper caste Meitei Hindus often look down upon them because of the food they ate and the gods that they worshipped and things like that. And so they became the outcasts. I mean, nobody called them Shudra to their face, but they were treated like that. Like, for example, at many times you will hear a lot of people talking about this Manipuri concept of mange, which means to lose something. And like, for example, if you're fetching water from a well and someone from the Loi community, or sometimes even someone from the Kuki or the Naga community, comes and fetches water from that same well, for a lot of high caste Meiteis, which is for me very ironic to call someone a high caste Meitei, but yeah, for a high caste Meitei, the moment that happens, they'll say mange, which means it's lost, it's become dirty, it's been sullied. And all of these practices were not practiced by everyone. I'm not saying everyone across Meitei society was doing this, but there were certain people who were doing it and continue to do it. So I grew up in a Meitei community that, while had these lofty ideals of how much they loved their tribal brethren, and the term tribal I use very consciously here because that's a term that the Meiteis have kind of used to define everyone other than themselves in today's context. And they say we look at our tribal brethren with so much love and affection because they are people who came from the elder brother, from this whole myth of we are related. And then if you go back into history politically also, the Naga tribes and even a lot of the Kuki-Zo tribes had connections with the Meitei Maharaja. Even after Vaishnavism happened, there was a lot of trade that happened between them. They'd had minor scuffles here and there. At different points of time, different tribes were connected to the Meitei royalty, married into the Meitei royal family. The Kuki-Zos were brought in by the Meitei Maharaja at some point of time. Also, the British were involved in that to protect
To protect, yeah.
the valley largely from attacks from powerful Naga tribes that were always trying to infiltrate the valley. So they've had a very complex and a history that has changed over time. It's been a love-hate relationship that has changed over time, but over the years, especially after the 17th century, I think Brahmanism and the whole Varna system moved into Manipur in some ways. And in some weird process, a lot of people who were of Kuki, Zo, or Naga origin became the new Dalits of the state. They became the new Shudras. They became people who didn't really fit into the Varna system, were not part of the religious majority, and so therefore were outcasts. And then over time, ideas like cleanliness, dirtiness, all of these things worked
Purity
into Meitei
pollution, right?
society.
Connected with
Yeah,
food and different aspects. Yeah.
absolutely. But I would like to make it very clear that, again, this was not everyone in Meitei society. Not everyone was doing it. Like, if you go into the really rural parts of Manipur, even today, if you go into the rural parts of the Imphal Valley, the amount of racism that you see in Imphal does not exist there.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people within the rural parts do not differentiate themselves from their tribal
No, I
brethren.
have
So,
been to
in that
I have been to parts like that, like in the
Hmm,
border of Tengnopal, right around Palel,
hmm,
is close to
hmm,
Kakching. It's very different. Even in the middle of this conflict, there is a market which is a mixed market.
absolutely.
I saw like people from both communities, and when I spoke to people from both communities, they have like a cordial relationship in for maintaining
Hmm,
peace, even in the middle of all this, and they
absolutely.
feel like they might be like people from outside of that region might come and target the communities there, but they till now they've managed to ward that off. So I have seen that myself.
True. Now, for me, I lived both those realities. So, like, while half my family is based in Imphal, the valley, my dad's family originally comes from a district called Thaubal, which is very much urban. But at some point of time, my grandfather converted to Christianity and decided to move away from Thaubal and move to a village called Sagang, which is next to Sugnu, which is a really interior town close by Kakching actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Sagang has this very interesting mix of population, though while Sagang is largely Meitei, the village right next to Sagang, and actually Sagang quite largely is also inhabited by Kom people.
Right.
So this duality and this love and friendship between the Combs and the Meiteis, there is just something that is normal. People intermarry between each other. Yes, there is a very strong Comb identity, a very strong Meitei identity, but nobody really looks at it differently. Like for example, when the Combs have all their beautiful Christmas celebrations that go on for days, half the people in the church are Meiteis there. And when Meiteis are doing Lai Harauba, a lot of the Koms come and participate in it. Like it's a very a beautiful situation. But I have seen this very clear "you are tribal, I am Meitei" kind of superiority inferiority problem happen a lot in the capital area, especially in Imphal.
In fact.
Now, when I went back to Manipur to study, I mean, I was born in Manipur, surprise, in Lamka actually, which yeah used to be called Churchandpur, and I prefer not to call it that because I actually always had a problem with that. I was like, why is this town called Churchandpur when it's in the middle of a non-Meitei area? Like, I understand the politics of Maharajas and all of that, but it just seemed like such a weird, a
Also, the
misfit of a name.
locally it's called Lanka, right? I mean,
In
that's what I've
Lanka, yeah.
heard.
So I was born in a small town called Saikot, which is just
Yeah.
outside Lanka. And so even though my mom is a South Indian, my dad is a Meitei, everyone else around us were Mar, Paite, Kuki, all kinds of communities, and that's the kind of community I was born into. I don't remember any of it because I came to the South when I was a very small child, like maybe when I was 1 years old. But then I went back when I was in my ninth and tenth, and I was largely in Imphal. I used to holiday in Sagang, and then I studied in this town called Nambol, which
Ah,
is
number.
on the
Yeah.
border of
Yeah. Yeah.
Imphal and Bishnupur
Vishnupur.
district.
Yeah.
And it's only in Nambol that I actually found out how Meiteis had started defining themselves as different from these other tribes, how they had started not wanting to consider themselves a tribe, even though while the myth of the Meitei origin is that we come from seven tribes or seven clans,
Seven clans.
seven yeks as we call them, and somehow while we also profess that history at the same time we're also not really comfortable saying we're tribal because the idea of tribal is inferior in some sort according
Yeah.
to the modern Meitei and things like that. So in that context I felt like this was a problem that was always going to erupt because prior to the Meitei Kuki conflict that just erupted, Kuki-Zo conflict, there was a Meitei Naga conflict that happened a few years ago. Prior to that there was a Meitei Pangal conflict where the Muslims and the majority Meitei Hindus had a huge problem. And the village of Lilong, which is on the outskirts of Manipur, I mean, sorry, on the outskirts of Imphal city, close to Thowai district, and since we come from Thowai, is again a place that I had visited very often. So my father was very proud of the diversity of the valley, and so would often take us to Lilong to show us how Meitei Muslims were Meitei at the same time and Muslim at the same time, and the pineapples of that village are very famous and things like that. So when I was in Manipur I felt like it was a very short period of peace between communities, but you always knew something was going to erupt because something had erupted in the past and it was just a matter of time before something happened in the future. So when all of this happened on May 3rd, I would like to say I was really shocked and the violence really hit me, but deep down at the back of my head, honestly, I felt like this was something that was going to happen. And so
And it
for
was
me, it was just like,
okay.
yeah, threshold being crossed. And so, yeah, I wasn't really surprised. What really surprised me was the absolute destruction of the government machinery at that point of time, and how over the next few days I realized that almost every possible political structure in Manipur had failed the Kuki-Zos at large. So, yeah.
So since May 3rd, right? It's been more than 3 months, and there have been the violence itself has seen different phases. In the beginning, there was absolute destruction, like you said, in the valley and some of the periphery areas. Then there was a lull. Then there was a return of the violence. We've seen this go, since I have been here. It's my third month here now, and it's like like right now it's been quiet for the last 1 week after absolute mayhem here close by at Kwakta and in and around. it's been quiet and everybody is like, okay, it's fine, maybe it'll be fine, but this is like the fifth or sixth time that people are saying that maybe things will be okay, maybe it won't. So this means it's anxiety for everybody involved, right? All communities. And there is, of course, the political layer that is at the center of this, who we hold responsible, which is the state administration, the Manipur state administration. But beyond them, who have refused to kind of accept any accountability. I mean, Biren Singh the other day during Independence Day said something like, it's all misunderstanding. That's what caused this.
Wow.
So there's an absolute lack of accountability on his part to accept that he is in the middle of this. But beyond that, it also means so much anxiety for everybody involved, right? All communities involved. That is, of course, the Kuki-Zos, the Meiteis, but also the Pangals, also the Nagas, everybody. So as somebody who's also probably kind of understanding this, and kind of watching people around you being anxious, how do you think, the Meitei community, one, and also like everybody else around the Meitei community, because there's a lot of back and forth going on between communities here. Even like you will see that on social media. I have seen some of your posts, and I've seen that you have also been attacked just for speaking your mind. And that's something that I've noticed, even when I'm speaking to people in and around the valley, that even if they want to express something, they're so scared. I've tried to
Hmm.
meet some, because many Meitei Christian churches were burned in the valley as well. They're absolutely not in a position to articulate anything, and I don't even want to kind of put them in a place to articulate that. So, general expression of angst, other than this polarized thing, right, where people are like, we have to attack them. The Meiteis are like, we have to attack the cookies, and the cookies are like, we have to hold them accountable. Is there any space to even you know, express an honest opinion? That's
I think
that's
it's very tough, Rishma. It's very tough right now because see, let me break it down like this. So I was in Manipur between 1999 and 2001, and at that point of time, me being a Meitei Christian or coming from a Meitei Christian family didn't matter. There are a lot of Meitei Hindus within my family who've not converted, and we never managed to ever have a problem. Like within the same family, there are Meitei Christians, there are Meitei Hindus, and there are Meitei Sanamahis, and we've coexisted and lived with each other, no problem whatsoever. I know many families that are Meitei Pangal, Meitei Hindu, with a lot of Kuki-Zos married into the family, Nagas married into the family. For a very long time, people of Manipur took a lot of pride in the fact that the Kabuis and the Meiteis were so similar. The Tangkhuls and the Meiteis always spoke about a shared heritage. There were a lot of efforts from the government and from social bodies over the years to try and make this Manipuri homeland a homeland to everyone. But somewhere along the line, I think, and we have to address this. Somewhere along the line, the plot was lost. Like if you go back in time, say around 20 to 30 years, even actually earlier than that, I remember DDK Imphal, which is the Doordarshan Kendra, and ARR Imphal, would start their programming with this beautiful song in Meitei called Hingminise Khoi, which basically says let's live with each other, let's live together with each other. And the song would be sung in all the major languages that were spoken in Manipur, and not just focusing on Meitei, it would also be sung in Tangkhul and Mar and Paite and a lot of things. And it was the way programming started on Doordarshan Kendra and on AIR. So yeah, when I went back to Manipur in 1999, I still had I saw the semblance of an effort by the government for decades before that, where they were trying to ensure that these ethnic conflicts don't happen, because there's always been a sense of this is a tinderbox and it's going to explode at any point of time. So we need to put as much efforts as we can to ensure that these communities don't fight with each other. The reason being that anyone who knows the history of Manipur knows that this idea of Manipur and the way the state was carved and what was decided that would become part of Manipur was very haphazard. Like it was literally drawn out by the British based on some random ideas of lands that were allied to the Manipuri Maharaja and things like that. But I don't think prior to independence, the northern Naga districts and the southern Kuki-Zo districts actually ever felt like they were part of something called Manipur. So this idea of a shared legacy, a common statehood, all of that happened only during independence. And also, Manipur didn't really become a part of the Indian Union immediately. It was a few years
76.
later that
Yeah.
it was literally, the we call it. I mean, there's a whole thing about how a lot of Meiteis especially believe that the king at that point of time was taken to Shillong and then coerced into signing the union with India, and how he really didn't want to do it and all kinds of things. But then that's a story for a different that itself is so complicated as to whether that really happened or didn't happen or whatever. But anyway, the idea was that let's try and make these three large communities work with each other, let them have one shared statehood. And for a long time, I think the chief ministers of Manipur and the powers that be were very aware of the fact that while the Meiteis might be a majority, they are not the only people in the state. But as time progressed, and I think over the last decade or so, there has been an effort politically to try and bully all the other communities into accepting a Meitei dominant culture. From imposing the Meitei Maik script, which does not belong to everyone, onto everyone, which was problematic. I mean, prior to that, yes, they were using the Bengali script across the state, but nobody had a problem with, different tribal groups using English on
Yeah.
their boards and signboards. But over the last few years, I've noticed the powers that be at Imphal have been imposing everyone to learn Meitei Maik, and by the name itself, it's Meitei Maik. It's not Manipuri, right?
Yeah.
This idea of Manipuri representing only Meiteis is where the problem started, and I think that falls back on the community where they felt like we were the majority, therefore we are the only representatives. It's really scary that even till today people use Meitei and Manipuri alternatively like they are the same thing, and they're not. Like Manipuri should involve Manipuri Nagas, Manipuri Kuki-Zos. Every single communities, even the small Tamil communities who live in the border at More, should be identified within this Manipuri idea. But what largely came out of it was India at large and the state also kind of associated Manipuri with Meitei. The very fact that dances like the Ras Leela is called Manipuri dance. It's not called Meitei Ras Leela. The language is called Manipuri to everyone. Even till today in the constitution, we are listed as Manipuri. We're not listed as Meitei Lone, which is the language that they're referring to.
Yeah.
And I think there was no political will for people to differentiate this. And so over the years, a lot of tribal communities, and again, I use this fully conscious of the fact that this is a term that people are using as a form of insult, as a form of othering, all kinds of things. But largely, Naga tribes and the Kuki-Zo tribes and the other tribes that also coexisted within the valley with this Meitei majority and also in the hills started feeling very separated from this whole idea of what is Manipuri, who is Manipuri. And then every time a issue happened, you'd often have the Meitei majority pointing fingers at them saying, oh, but basically you're Naga. And then basically you're Kuki-Zo. So basically you're Burmese, basically you're this. And we saw that repetition happen here again, where the moment we had a problem, the first thing was they are not from here. They're from Myanmar. This thing has always existed.
Yeah,
Similarly with
this
the Nagas, they've all,
illegality, this thing of
yeah.
illegality and, kind of completely dismissing a person's place within society, that is what is kind of it really, it's very, beyond scary, it's also very unsettling because like you said, there are these common stories which bring communities together. But at one point, it could be because of the political posturing, it could be because of the political
Mm,
positioning, but society at large to kind of voice that out, which is where again I'm a
absolutely.
little confused because not confused, I'm a little like little how would I put it? One sec, let me find the right word. I'm a little unsure whether I should say that everybody feels that way or whether they have to go along with that narrative because, it is such a time where it's so polarized, that if you don't go with that narrative, will you be targeted as well?
So again, I'm very happy you brought that up, but I'm just gonna go back a little bit into this whole idea of the othering that happened. Like if you look at the whole the existence of Manipur as a state, so far we've had only two non-Meitei chief ministers,
Yeah.
and both of them from the Tangkhul community, which is the next big majority in the state. Tangkhul Nagas, who occupy almost 90% of the Ukrul district, are the next big majority in the state, and so we've had two chief ministers from there. Otherwise, it's always been a Meitei dominated house, it's been a Meitei dominated assembly, and it's always been a argument of more numbers with the Meiteis, lesser tribal population, blah blah blah. So much so this time when people said that, oh, the tribal populations are rising, it hit me right in the face that that's basically where the problem lies, that people feel threatened that the Meiteis are not going to be majority anymore, and I think it's reflective of what's happening largely in India
Largely.
also, no?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, this whole idea of we are becoming a minority, they are becoming majority. Anyway, going back to what you had asked, like um I'm sorry, what you had, what was that
This
question you had
othering,
posed?
this othering and how
Yeah.
everybody kind of wants to voice. I mean,
Mm,
it it's very clear that it came from the political establishment, it came from
mm-hmm,
the BJP government, it came from these leaders,
mm,
and it slowly started. Along with the leaders, the CSOs, the Meitei CSOs
mm,
also kind of strongly use the same language. It was almost simultaneous. And now,
mm,
after the conflict, right, the kind of strengthening of that narrative, like
mm, mm,
every press release of the Kokomi, every kind of, when you're traveling through the valley, if you speak to, let's say, some of the Mira Paibis who are,
mm,
doing
mm,
whatever it is that they're doing, their
mm,
first thing will be about this illegality, illegal
mm,
immigrants. It's almost like it's the narrative that has been spoon fed, you can say, to a certain extent, but also people are taking it in. In this
mm,
othering, people are kind of using that vocabulary that has, I think, come about in the last few years, right? With a lot of,
absolutely.
I mean, there are different reasons that they have said to use that language, but it's become such so common, which is where my question arises, which is that, that a community that has this common stories, that have a
Mm,
commonality of origin, and that it has completely flipped to the other side, where, you
mm,
are you are
mm,
voicing out that you're othering, and you're voicing out that othering through this language of being illegal, right?
mm.
That's the thing. That's what I was kind of talking about, or asking you about. How is it that that becomes so commonly used, in the sense that.
So I think it's again, it's a very complicated answer, because I don't think, as much as why I would like to hold the BJP and the government in power in the Imphal Valley responsible for whatever has happened, I'm going to cut them some slack and say that this whole posturing of the other
Mm,
actually, I think, started quite a while ago. So if you go back into the history of the valley, you realize that at some point of time, the different. So at one point in time, there was an RPF, which was the Revolutionary People Front or Party or whatever. That was backed by China at some point of time, and I know everyone knows about this. Anyone who's read about the Northeast knows about this. Then there was the PLA, which was the People's Liberation Army. That again, cropped up during independence time, and then after that for a few decades, and all there were all these militia organizations across the Northeast, and many of them were trying to create a separate nationhood for states like Manipur, states like Mizoram, and I mean that's another huge discussion as to why they started, why the PLA was there, why the RPF was there, all of that. But sorry, not the RPF, but I think it was called Revolutionary People's Party or Force or something. There were many, there were so many, but somewhere in the early 90s you see that the militant organizations started dividing as per ethnic identity. You get the NSC-NIN, you get different Kuki based militant organizations, you get Meitei based militant organizations like KYKLO, all of them looking out only for the interests of their community in particular. And I think the othering started there, where you had militia organizations saying, for our own good of our own community, we have to other the other person. Also, because largely Nagaland and the NSCNIM movement was trying to build a greater Nagalim idea. A lot of the Naga militants were claiming the northern districts of Manipur, certain districts from Assam, certain districts from Arunachal Pradesh. And so the Naga identity was becoming stronger in the north of the Imphal Valley. And the Kuki identity was also becoming quite strong in the south of the valley. So at some point of time, you do see the Meiteis also creating their own very strong identity. And then the othering, which was otherwise always hidden, and was only spoken of in whispers, was suddenly okay for you to talk about. It was okay for you to say you had a problem with someone being Naga. It was okay for you to say that you had a problem with someone being Kuki, because you had these militia outfits which were running a para government for a very, very long time in Manipur, openly saying that you could do it. Like I remember mid 1990s, when the Meitei militant groups were becoming quite popular. At one point of time, they decided that anyone who is of Indian origin but not of Manipuri origin would have to pay something called the Mayang tax. And for a long time, if you were not of Meitei or Manipuri origin per se, and you came from, let's say, Bihar or a Kerala or a Tamil Nadu, for you to exist peacefully within the state of Manipur, you had to pay them a tax. And everyone knew about this, and everyone paid the tax without complaining, because it was just the only way for you to stay alive. But then if you go further in time, there was also the othering that was caused by mainstream India. Like, for example, um, the huge presence of the Assam rifles there, the huge presence of commandos there. Generally, people who were at the Jawan level, who were not really aware of how diverse India is and how everyone in the state of Manipur also is Indian. And so, therefore, there was an othering that was made by them. So, in many times, othering happens because of defense, like it's defense
Yeah,
mechanisms,
yeah,
right?
right, right.
So I remember when I was growing up in Manipur, because I don't necessarily look very Manipuri, I could pass off as, I don't know, Bengali or whatever. Many times when I'm on the road, I would see armed forces, Jawans from the Assam Rifles or whatever. And I mean, I'm very happy with what the Assam Rifles has been doing in this situation. But I also remember the uglier side of them a few years ago, where I would have Jawans looking at me and talking to me in Hindi and telling me terrible things about the local people. Like,
Right.
I remember once I was sharing a samosa or a chaat or something, not a chaat, like a singju with a bunch of them at the Manipur University gate. And they felt it absolutely okay to talk to a 18-year-old boy in extremely disgusting ways, and said things like, oh, they keep telling that, oh, we rape them and blah blah blah, and we abuse them and all of that, but do you know, it's these women come running to us because in the northeast all of them have small penises. And so it was that bad. The othering was so bad that not only people thought that the people of the northeast were inferior, there were also this idea of we are superior to them. We mainlanders are superior to these people. And I
Yeah,
saw that echoing within the valley again, where then Meiteis were like, we are superior to everyone else. And then you
true.
have the Nagas saying, we are superior to you. And then the Kukis going, we are superior to all of you. And then, so everyone was trying to impose their superiority over the other community and saying, they are ugly, they are uncivilized, they are unclean, they are this, they are that, we are superior, we have a civilized language, we have a script, we have this. Everyone was bringing out their guns and trying to prove that they were better than the other community. And it is in that scenario where you see the very, very precariously stitched fabric of Manipur kind of come undone. So when you ask me about this othering, I don't think it happened just now. I agree the
Yeah,
BJP has
right now.
brought in
Right
and
now, it
made
has
it
just been at
okay.
a more, yeah, it's just been at a
Yeah.
more like official kind of othering, right? Through
Yeah,
policies.
and people are not scared to say these things anymore and do these things anymore. That is where the government failed everyone in Manipur. That not a single person was scared to do what they did. That they knew they had the full might of the state government behind them. Every single person who went and did all of those crazy violent acts across the Kuki communities within Imphal Valley were fully aware that they had the full support of the police with them. If you look at any of the videos, you'll notice that most of the time the mobs had the police right next to them,
Yeah.
walking along with them while they were doing all of these pillaging and burning and all of that. And for me, that is the biggest problem, and that is what sets this apart. That everyone did everything fully knowing that they would never be called out for it.
And even now, even after all these months, that there was an MLA who was an advisor to the CM who was like, I mean, we've seen videos of him. and who was almost killed, electrocuted, whatever. There's so many descriptions of what happened to him. That nobody has been arrested. It's for me a representation of how broken the criminal justice system is, because if an MLA, again, he is somebody who had like, who was well respected by everybody across the Kuki-Zo tribes, like in this interview, his wife says that he was a peacemaker. He was trying to bring people together. That's how he was spoken about even in the hill districts. That somebody like that gets attacked, almost killed, and yet there is no action taken by the state government. It's not it's like not, forget about unsettling. It's the truth of the situation, right? There's nothing to help no, forget resolve. There's nothing to help, like, get to even a point where people can sit across the table and talk. That's how I see it, because justice, reparations, what does that mean if you're not able to, like, even address your own role as the administrator? That's one part. Okay, the second part, again, this is a question that, maybe this can be the last thing that we discuss. Across the valley in some of the camps that I have visited, right, I see that within Meitei community, the ones that have been very badly affected are like working class people, okay, farm workers, people who are predominantly farm workers actually, who have lost out on what, like, for instance, what some of them said is, we it's the same thing that even, people from the Kuki community, people who just had their land which they could cultivate and live out of, even in situations like during COVID lockdown, for instance, some of them said that we could just cultivate our land, have enough for us to survive. That is, so there is a similarity of this class of people between both the Kuki and the Meitei community, right? Like in the Kuki community, even the elite, even the middle class, they've all lost their property in the valley, right? Even like people who are really well off. But amongst the Meiteis, I see like predominantly the people who've been displaced are working class people who are right now all spread across the camps. And it's my observation, after speaking to them, that even the state of the displaced, though it's being written about, they are not the focus point even in the valley. That's something that I have felt. I don't know whether that's true or not. Even like in whatever it is that the reports of the valley based media that I see, right, that the focus is still on politicking, and this centering statements of Kokomi of, we will drive out all illegal immigrants, etc. But what about centering the fact that the working class people amongst the Meiteis are predominantly the most affected? Is this an observation? Maybe, you can add to it to kind of highlight or kind of discuss how is it that people within the Meitei community who are affected are coping or are being helped.
Hmm. I think you've raised a very valid point. Something that I also noticed in the last 3 months was that even while all of this was happening, and while there were a lot of people who were um, a lot of media backed stories where they were trying to demonize and criminalize the Kuki community as, drug growers and peddlers and all kinds of things, and then of course illegal migrants, refugees, whatever they were trying to say. You would notice that in the initial coverage that you had, like even if in the videos that came out later, even when a lot of the national media went into the Manipur Valley and was starting to talk to people, you would find a lot of Kukis who were still saying, but I still love my brother, but I still feel for them, they also suffered as much as me. And you would have certain Meiteis also doing that, right? You had a lot of Meiteis who were especially from rural background. I'm so happy that you pointed that, from rural background, saying even if this happened, they are still my people and we protect them, they protect us. So amidst all of this violence that was kind of driven from Imphal, you did notice that in the rural areas, a lot of Meitei villagers were protecting tribals and Kukis, and a lot of Kuki villagers were protecting Meiteis. You brought up a similar story around Kakching that you came across. And
Yeah.
what I've realized is there were voices throughout this, including a voice like mine, where we were saying, hey, please understand that you all are being literally driven by political forces to literally hate each other right now, because it's going to benefit someone. We don't really know who's benefiting, because we're still not figured out the whole agenda of why all of this work happened. But someone's benefiting out of this, and we need to wake up to that. At that point of time, a lot of us were saying, remember that these are your brothers and sisters. Remember that you lived as neighbors with them. Remember all of those things and try and not be too violent. And at that point in time, voices like mine and theirs were being silenced constantly. Like, for example, even today, when I shared the Al Jazeera video that you had posted, immediately I got around 50 messages on Instagram claiming whether me being Meitei itself was authentic, and all of these were bots. Clearly there is an effort from Imphal. I don't know who's behind the effort, but clearly there is an effort to spread hate. And if you look at the whole campaign that happened, the anti-cookie campaign, it was driven by a bunch of Metes who are pissed off at the fact that a tribal community like the Kukis have the gall to stand up against the Metes. It's driven by a bunch of few individuals who have this problem. Like, even if you see the initial reports, what they were screaming on the road, what they were saying, it was it was basically because a bunch of them wanted this ST status for Metes, and the cookies rose up in opposition, and the question was, who are they to oppose us? We majority superior Metes, how can these cookies oppose us? And then the whole machinery worked out. These fake reports of someone being raped in Churchanpur, and all of these fake news that can't be verified was being spread through WhatsApp and other mediums all throughout the the Manipur Valley. There were lots of WhatsApp forwards. Now I wish I could get screenshots of them, basically urging people to hate the cookies and claiming a lot of things and building a narrative so that people don't feel bad for what is happening, right? But even amidst all of this, there were so many Metes who were just like, but this is nonsense, but this is not true. But we live here. We know they are not growing poppy. We know they are not doing this. So much so, I still know that there are a lot of political leaders from the Meitei community who are being silenced even today, who are openly saying the poppy cultivation is driven by the Meiteis. The Meiteis are the drug lords here and not the cookies, even though they're using the hills to grow these things.
There is
It's
Brinda
not
ma'am
them who's
also,
doing.
right, who's been speaking actually
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
well.
There are so many people who are talking about this, but our voices are being shut down. We are people who are constantly forced to prove our Meitei-ness to the Meitei majority, because they're like, how dare you not stand up for this? How can you not stand up for your own kin? Because they've othered themselves so much, it's now become a us versus them. And if you're Mete, therefore, you have to just blindly turn your eyes to all the rubbish that has been done over the last 3 months and say, no, the Metes are right, the Metes are right, the Metes are right. And while I do agree that there are faults even from the cookie community, I'm not saying that they're all angels and the cookies are the victims. Of course, there were certain Metes who were also victims. I know for a fact today, and I can say this fully aware of the fact that I am making a political statement. I know that the problem was started by the Metes. I know that the Metes are the ones who ignited the whole problem. And I know for a fact that if there were retaliatory efforts from the Kuki side, it was to protect themselves. So this was not a lot of the Kuki attacks on the Metes were defense rather than offense, whereas a lot of the Mete acts on the Kukis were completely offense, saying, how dare you, we will show you your place, right? But even in all this madness that erupted, we did see a lot of Metes standing up and saying, this is horrible, this should not be done. A lot of people openly went up against the Mera Paibis, which is very powerful. Like, I cannot have ever imagined myself having the guts to talk about the Mera Paibis if I was in Manipur. If I was physically there, I know how powerful they are, and I know how much of a respected institution they are. And for me to see this other side of them really shocked me. Grishma, you have no clue. Like, I was someone who literally spoke about the Myra Pipes with so much pride prior to this whole issue. And now I've seen what they've devolved into. And it breaks my
No,
heart. And I can't
all
believe.
of us, no,
Yeah.
it's not just like many of us who have been kind of uh, aware of the work of the Mira Pairis have always spoken about how they've stood up to the forces
True.
in the valley, how they've been assertive about what's happening to the community, to the women, all of these things. It's part of the literature that we've read. It's part of what we've articulated about women's movement in Manipur, right? It's like it has been shocking for many of us, but I know it must have been, for you to be able to articulate that must have been even more difficult, considering that the few people that I've been able to meet who've also, like, kind of voiced out their uh, discomfort or just their general disappointment with what's happening have not been able to say it out, openly because they're here. Because they're here. But Romal, I've known you for so long. I've known you for close to 10 years now, and we've seen so many such movements, like spiraled by hate when we were in, like, so much organizing around it. But, in the time that since we are peers, in the time that we've all been active in organizing or, in journalism, this has been like, at a level. I mean, but yeah, I'm sure, people constantly say that to me here in Manipur, that we have seen conflicts go on for years. This is not a big deal. We've seen it go on for 2 3 years, so this will take its course, is something that they say. But we are also at a time where everything is, on a fast forward thing, right? There's social media, there's no internet now, but when any issue happens, when any issue starts off, be it like violence against a particular community, or be it any form of discrimination, there is a lot of organizing, lot of voices that are able to kind of come together and call it out. And that happened in a very, very slow. I mean, it was very late by the time that happened here, I agree. But now there are more people speaking around it. There are more people kind of saying that somebody needs to be held accountable, right? So moving forward, how do you see, you know, I mean, it is very polarized. This is something that we can't deny, right? It's very polarized now. But from the mainland, from outside of Manipur, there are people who are constantly trying to talk about it now. What do you think people should do? What more needs to be done for, this to at least move an inch forward and not backwards again?
I think Meitei society has to organize itself. It has to hold up a mirror to what has happened. As a Meitei, I can only speak on behalf of the Meitei community. As much as they might disown me for taking a stand that is so critical of the Meitei community, I still identify as Meitei quite proudly. And I think the Meitei community needs to hold a mirror to itself. Because it's not like I am the only voice who's saying that. There are multiple Meitei people who are openly saying that what happened was wrong. We have to stand up for what we did. A lot of the violence that was propagated is much larger from our side, and we need to take accountability for that. The only reason being that as a majority, that is the onus falls on us, because as a majority we literally rounded up a minority and did whatever we wanted for 3 months and got away with it, with the government completely backing us and the police not stopping us from doing anything. Like the amount of reports I've seen of police standing by while people were being abused and raped and beheaded, all fully aware of what was happening. So we were silent accomplices to all of this violence. And for a healing process to start, forget about the movements where we are now. The Meitei, population is very angry that the Kuki-Zos want to divide Manipur. And again, it's again that this offensive. How dare you divide our state? Who are you to divide our state? If we abuse you also, you must sit down quietly and take it. You can't be wanting to separate from us. Look at the larger perspective. Look at the larger perspective of the Manipur state. We need to be together. It's very easy for Meiteis to take this stand today when they have not witnessed a lot of the violence, right? So it's easy for them to have these lofty goals of keeping Manipur together and blah blah blah. But on the other side, I understand exactly the kind of fears the Kuki-Zos have had, because all minority communities in Manipur have lived with these fears for the last 70, 80 years, where they've been fully made aware of the fact that they are a minority, that their lives are always held in the balance, that it's completely left up to the majority as to whether they live peaceful lives or they don't live peaceful lives. So today, when the Kuki-Zos are organizing themselves into a political movement and are saying they want separation or they want different administration, I think it's high time that Meiteis stood up and noticed them and respected them and said, let's at least consider this as a possibility, and not rubbish all of them and say, no, 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 the larger importance of the state staying together is more important. Forget about the Bahrain government. I mean, I'm 100% sure that that government cannot come back into power. Nobody will vote him back into power, at least in Manipur. Even the Meiteis are not going to vote him back into power, because now in August, a large part of the Meiteis, while they are still under a lot of pressure to not really speak their mind, are fully aware of the fact of what has happened. And I don't think anybody is saying what Biren did was great or what his government did was great. But very few people are still able to voice out their opinions on what really happened in the valley. And for me, I feel that before we even talk about what is politically going to happen within that state, whether the future is in the breakup of the state into multiple union territories or separately administered territories or whatever, first we need to have a social movement of forgiving each other. I know I sound like a missionary here, but I really don't see any other way possible, because the two communities have been pushed against each other so badly right now that there's just hatred on both sides. And for them to share that same piece of land, even if it is a political state or it's not even a geographical idea, but just that political state, to share it together, for governance to be able to happen, for bureaucracy to work, for anything to work, the the forgiving has to start at some point of time. For the forgiving to start, people have to own up to what they did. And if they own up to what they did, only then can we have these conversations of what is the possible future for all of these communities in Manipur who share the state right now. And in all of this, I think even the Nagas have a huge role to play, because I'm actually quite shocked that the Nagas have not involved. I mean, maybe it was a very political conscious step to not get involved in the whole mess, but there were also Naga women and Naga people who were attacked simply because they looked like they were Kuki, right? So when the violence happened, nobody is going to come and ask you whether you're Naga or Kuki. They're just going to look at what you look like and assume what you are, and the violence is going to happen. And I don't think we can afford to have this happen again. We've had it in
Yeah.
the past, and we've said we made it too normal. We've said, yeah, violence is always there. As someone told you, we've
Mm.
seen this for such a long time that it's normal for us. How long will this be the normal? How long will Manipur continue to be this tinderbox where any moment anything can erupt? I don't want that to be the future of the state. If there is a possibility of peace, if that's what we want, if we want us to be a normal functioning part of India where peace can prevail, and then therefore maybe economy can develop, and careers and commerce and all of these things can happen, it can only happen if we actually come to face to face with each other, and actually come to that table, and we talk to each other as equals. And right now I don't think anyone wants to do that. Everyone is still blaming each other. I know for a fact that the Kuki-Zos feel extremely wronged in this situation, and I think they have every right, because years and years and years of suppression by a Meitei majority at some point of time is going to bubble and burst out. And I'm shocked it took so long, honestly. But I'm happy that today they are standing up for themselves, and I think it's about time that the Meitei majority um, be better people and listen to what the Kuki-Zos have to say for themselves and what they want as a future with the state. And if it's going to become a point where they want separate status, if they want a separate administrative area or unit, that's something that maybe we should be able to talk about. I know for a fact that because of this issue, Mizoram has become closer to the districts in the south of Manipur, and so I know there is going to be a lot of political support from
Thank
there.
you, Roman. It was great to have you. Thank you for talking to me. I know you're yourself like, stuck, not just stuck, but you're like facing a lot of heat because right from the beginning, I've seen that you have been saying what you feel about the issue, and I've seen hate kind of being directed at you. But thank you. In spite of that, thank you for talking to me.